So what was the biggest misconception for most business leaders usually when it comes to operationalizing AI governance then?
Based on my interactions and conversation, is that now suddenly they have to erect a whole set of new committees, that they have to have these new programs, that they have to, you almost hear a sigh from the room, like, oh, we have now this whole additional compliance cost because we have to do all this new things. And the reason I see that as a bit of a misconception, because again, building on everything that was just said earlier, you already have compliance, you already have committees, you already have governance. It's an integration of that, because otherwise, guess what's going to happen? We all know that this is the next thing around the corner that's going to pop up, whatever it's going to be called. Are you going to have to set up a whole new committee just because of that? And then the next thing, another one?
Welcome to Analyse Asia, the premium podcast dedicated to dissecting the pulse of business, technology, and media in Asia. I'm Bernard Leong, and today we are diving into the critical question of how financial institutions can adopt AI responsibly at scale. With me today is David Hardoon, Global Head of AI Enablement at Standard Chartered Bank, a distinguished leader with over 2 decades of experience spanning financial institutions, academia, startups, and regulators. David played a pioneering role in shaping Singapore's national AI strategy for the financial sector during his time at the Monetary Authority of Singapore, where he was instrumental in developing the FEET principles for ethical AI use in finance. He combines deep technical expertise with strategic insight, making him one of the most influential voices in advocating responsible AI adoption globally. So, David, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much, Bernard, and you're being far, far too kind. I simply have had opportunities and privilege to support, and this is a space that I love. So I'm very privileged in that particular aspect.
So, David, you had a career spanning academia, startups, regulatory bodies, and now global banking. What drew you first to data and AI?
What drew me first to data AI? So my usual response is going back to a story when I was 16, and I say detention, which is true because that's actually what ultimately drew me to the world of programming and Pascal. But on a broader sense, what drew me is actually trying to understand better human behavior.
Hmm.
And I know this may sound a bit weird because, like, what do you mean? But if you go back to the origin of artificial intelligence and whatnot, actually, its roots is psychology. Its root is neuroscience. Its root is really kind of unlocking, unraveling the mystery of us. That's what drove me. And to maybe combine the two things together of the behavioral psychology, the human nature aspect of things, and programming, that sudden, realization that wait, hold on a second, we can actually program a computer to do this interesting task like a baby where or young child where you presented them pictures of a car and a motorbike or whatnot, and even without fully understanding the context of what that thing is, they can learn to distinguish it. Honestly, I was hooked. That was the beginning of the journey.
So, I think what are the formative experiences that actually shape how you now approach AI and analytics? I think that goes hand in hand. You and I have private dinners discussing about this. Data is extremely important.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So I would bucket it at perhaps three different kind of pillars, and they're continuously evolving because, as we all know, data is continuously evolving. So, as I mentioned, the very starting point was I was just morbidly curious about this. Wait, we can learn, we can actually program. I want to go into it, and that kind of resulted in going to the more theoretical side, where I was interested with that fundamental question of how do you learn? What is the thing that drives it? And for the audience and for the people listening in, we're familiar with the different types and the variety of the methodologies. Actually, what interests me, and not that I'm promoting or recommending my thesis, it's pretty antiquated by
Mm.
now, is I was fascinated about the world of semantic models. So the premise behind
Ah,
semantic models is capturing information, capturing knowledge.
that's right.
And my idea and what I got fascinated about was if you can capture knowledge, actually the learning mechanism becomes secondary. So that was one pillar.
Mm.
That then took me to that next dimension, and some may argue my first step into the quote unquote the dark side of wait. How do you make this real? How do you actually start implementing it and result in applications in programs beyond just a piece of paper? And you find that there is a delta, there is a difference. I used to have, how should I say, interesting debates with my supervisor, who was a theoretical mathematician of, you had a theory and it's like, but it didn't quite work in practice. I was like, well, what do you mean it didn't work in practice? Well, there are other factors that we need to consider. And then finally, which I would kind of say the last stretch of the period is not just so theory, application, operationalization. And you can say, David, okay, you're splitting hairs. And I would have pushed back and saying, no, there is a delta.
mm,
Because what takes theory to be an application has considerations. But what takes an application to be operationalized also has very specific considerations. And an example from many years ago, and I won't name the person or the bank, I was asked to go talk about optimization.
mm,
And of course, I was like, yeah, I'm happy to go talk about optimization. Let's just say I got a good scolding. That was my starting point when I realized, actually, it's not about optimization. It's not about the algorithm. It's not about the application. It was about how do I use it?
mm.
How does it make a difference? How it gets integrated in my day to day? So in a rough sense, those are the three buckets I kind of see it as.
Mm. I think one interesting thing is, I mean, even for me, because I think we are around in the UK at the same time, when I was working on machine learning and doing the algorithms, I was sitting right next to the Human Genome Project. So
Mm,
the development of algorithms may be important, but what we are, tasked to do is actually to further the data analysis and the annotation of the human genome. So a lot of that focus actually forces us to be more production level. And I think that transition is quite interesting. But maybe just help me understand when you
sure.
transition, say, from academia to regulatory roles, which I never have that experience, how does it influence your thinking about responsible
Oh,
AI?
oh, absolutely. And I can say without a shadow of a doubt, and to give them full credit, I learned of and I've absolutely appreciated to this day the world of governance and regulation. I mean, if you had asked David prior to working for the regulator, candidly, I wouldn't even have thought about it. It won't even be there as a concept other than like, yeah, there's guidelines. Waltzing into it, I realized two things, and I've realized it. In fact, I realized it because I used to get asked this question. Oh, David, don't you think that governance, compliance, regulation, whichever form you want to call it as, is a brake or an inhibitor for innovation and adoption of new technologies?
Hmm.
And that really got me thinking, but really got me thinking because, as you rightfully put, I'm not a regulator. I've come into the world of regulations. And what I've realized is actually we need governance, not because like, oh, it's the right thing to do. No, we need governance in order to accelerate our adoption and usage of technology. And let me give you perhaps a silly driving analogy. If you know the road, if you know the rules of the road, if you know the different speed limits at every single point, if you know where the traffic lights are, if you know where the speed cameras are, well, guess what? You can drive fast and you can
Mm.
enjoy it. It's when you don't know where things are. You have the people who, stop, stop, start, stop, slow down, and you start, under your breath yelling like, why are you going 30 when you're supposed to be going 50? Why? That's exactly the point. And what you find is a lot of times, ironically, because there's this kind of aversion to the word G, governance, and people trying to not get involved with it, is that's resulting in things slowing down. That's resulting in having all of these start, stop, start, stop, start, stop, is by having the proper governance, having the transparency of it, and having the conversation. Like I had the privilege of having, and you kind of mentioned feed as one of the examples
Mm.
of, okay, what is it that we're trying to achieve? What is the control, or the bad thing that we're trying to prevent? Okay, coming from technology, coming from the research, this is how we can go about achieving it. So you see, now it becomes a constructive conversation rather than this is what you need to do. And you go like, this doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, so I'm thinking that I have two strands of conversation that I want to engage you. So I think given that you have talked about feed, let's start with the AI governance and implementation piece
Sure.
first. So you were instrumental in developing the feed principles at MAS. I think Paul Coburn, my mentor, who's formerly from DBS, was also part of that committee as well, who looked at it. Can you share the origin story of the framework?
Oh, okay, I'm giggling because it's a bit of an unusual origin.
Yeah.
So, as part of the mandates that I was given in MAS was actually supporting and developing the industry with respect to its adoption of AI. And I like going into what I believe in, first principles and root cause. And when you looked at the industry and you spoke with people individually, yeah, everyone said we do AI. But then when you really open up the box, it's like, is it in production? Is it being used? Maybe, maybe not. So I said, you know what? Rather than sitting in an ivory tower, presuming that I know or we know something, let's have a conversation. And it was an interesting conversation because I took the compliance officers from the various banks locally to lunch. And they were very shaken. They're like, wait, why is MAS taking us to lunch? And it was because I was really wanted to have an open conversation as to what are the challenges that they're facing? What is holding them back or not? Or it could be, as it was, an interpretation of what they think is the intention. And then I had a separate lunch and conversation with the, again, variety of titles from CIO, CDO, CAO, heads of, same conversation of what's stopping? What's that inhibition? And what I mentioned earlier, that realization that having good governance is in fact an accelerant to adoption, that's exactly when the penny dropped. When it was, you're telling me that compliance is stopping you. Okay, let me take its face value. I speak to compliance and like, well, this is our understanding. And you realize that you had, every hand was trying to do the right thing, but no one was properly clapping. And actually what was needed was a set of, well, let's put this out in in the market, in the audience, in the industry of, this is our expectations. This is what we believe should be done. Notice though, for the frustration of some at the beginning, we didn't say how. So in the fee principles, it's not prescriptive. It's providing the objective that is trying to be met. And let me give you, and you see where I'm going with this. One specific example of, this whole debate of, oh, can we use sensitive attributes? And, you have different jurisdictions coming with different stuff. We didn't say you can or you can't. What we said is, you need to justify it. And why do you need to justify it? Because there needs to be an underlying intent behind it. So to make sure there's the right reason and it's aligned with the organizational objectives. So you're seeing, so it was a focus on what is your intention? What is it that you're trying to achieve? And then saying, well, now it's up to you. That resulted in the ability of having internal clarity. These are the things we're trying to achieve, and this is why we're trying to achieve them. And yeah, it could be a debate. And then the people downstream in terms of implementation could we have clarity with respect to the speed limit. And it's not about you saying to me, no, but David, why is it 50 kilometers an hour, not 70? Sorry, it is. This is what we decided. Okay, fine. Then I will drive 50 and I can get to my point rather than trying to fight the law and going 70 and then getting arrested or going 30, because you see my point. It's creating that clarity. So it's actually, the outcome was the realization that clarity on governance was needed. And that's effectively what FEET is.
So I think you articulated also the lessons learned from applying these governance frameworks across organizations from the government they cooperate with. So the question then is, how do the FEET principles actually help, say, financial institutions, if you can give me some color to it, then balance with innovation and ethical considerations of AI? I remember when I was talking to one of the prominent banks when I was still in AWS, and one of the things that we did a very detailed pilot program where we literally have to do all the data masking, privacy protection, and making sure that everything works, and even deploying it from on premises into cloud with everything encrypted. So how does those lessons translate into the real world?
So let me try and give you a few examples, a few analogies. But let me start off by saying, remember what I said in the very beginning, it's first principles. Why do I keep going back to that? I keep on emphasizing it is because we have, and it's an understandable tendency, especially when it comes to new technology, to go like, oh, everything is new. It's new invented. We need to basically, it's a blank canvas. We have to start from the ground up. Whereas I personally take a slightly more different approach by saying, well, no, especially when it comes to governance, when it comes to responsibility, when it comes to intent, that shouldn't change the objective. What may change is the approach in achieving it. Now, again, by saying this, don't get me wrong. Of course, there'll be an introduction of new concerns, new risks, 100%. But fundamentally, is the intent the same? And again, let me give you an example. So prior to it, there'll be this massive deliberations on, oh, discrimination by AI, discrimination by AI. Can you use it in loan algorithms, or can we use it in HR? Can we use it in this? And what effectively is, it decomposed the problem. It decomposed the problem by saying, number one is, AI aside, how do you deal with these concerns today? And if the answer to that is, we don't, well, there you go. You need to have an approach, a mechanism, whether it's part of a committee, whether it's part of a principle, a conduct and culture, not for me to say, to have that. That's number one.
Mm.
Number two, if you do have it, see, now it's the question of, okay, how do we incorporate the world of AI? So, and you see how that interlates, because they say, okay, yeah, no, we acknowledge, we have, let's say, a principle with respect to fair,
Mm.
this will sound like an oxymoron, but a fair discrimination
Yep.
approach. But now, in order, because we acknowledge that AI may amplify the potential risk that's coming for it, we need to have a more resilient manner in terms of identifying it. Well, guess what? I need to know, again, allow me to use as an example. Let's say the risk is in terms of gender discrimination.
Mm.
I need to know your gender in order to assure that I am having a fair-based approach with respect to that. So you see, it now creates a mechanism in order providing that unknown justification, rather than taking the approach of like, oh, no, we can't do it, we can't use it. And again, let me give you the famous reference of what happened with the Apple card,
Mm.
Goldman Sachs, where
That's
they
right.
actually, there was the big hoo-ha, and they actually said, but we're, from a regulatory point of view, we're not allowed to use gender information. So, and what you find is that when you start using the more sophisticated type of techniques, actually using it explicitly within a model doesn't mean it's not there.
Mm.
So you need to use it potentially in order to identifying the risks that are occurring. That's one particular example. The
Mm.
other one is an ability of representing the application within organizing. I still remember this. I had a conversation with two, right, because we had this little tri-party debate where one reviewed the potential application of AI within their HR practices and decided it wasn't a question of can we or can we not do it, because obviously you can. They decided we don't want to because of our approach, our conduct, blah blah blah, whatever it may be. We are actively choosing not to leverage on these capabilities for right or for wrong. Not an issue because it's aligned with a certain manifesto they have.
Uh,
Another organization said, well, we have chosen to use AI and we are cognizant of that potential discrimination, but actually it's okay because we're specifically looking, let's say, at a program which is anyway designated for women, so it's not relevant for men, etc., and so forth. So you see, it's kind of forced us to think about the intent. And that's what I meant by we get distracted by technology. Like, for example, now,
mm.
what happened with Gen AI? Oh, we need to worry about Gen AI governance, Gen AI governance. And I kind of coyly came out by saying, well, again, it's not that it's not introducing new risks. Let us take the beautiful world of hallucinations.
Yep.
We had that little conversation about that hallucination may be a bug for some and a feature for others, as you said.
Mm.
But actually, again, first principles. What happens when you have an intern that does something weird, that's something wrong? You see my point. How do you handle
Yes.
that? I
Yeah.
remember a very good lawyer friend of mine, he was slightly up in arms on the fact like, oh, Gen AI is competing. And he said, but all Gen AI is doing is putting words together in a way that seems reasonable and logical. And I kind of, in a slightly characteristic fashion, cheekily looked at him and said, well, isn't that what you as a lawyer does as well? And he said, touche, David, touche. But you see my point. It's effectively forcing people to go back to first principles and don't reinvent the wheel.
Mm.
These are things which we must address and understand first, and then apply methodologies in terms of either addressing them or preventing in certain cases.
Mm. So what was the biggest misconception for most business leaders usually when it comes to operationalizing AI governance then?
Oh, wow. I think, to me, based on my interactions and conversation, is that now suddenly they have to erect a whole set of new committees, that they have to have these new programs, that they have to, it's like this it's almost like you almost hear a sigh, from the room, like, oh, we have now this whole additional compliance cost because we have to do all this new things. And the reason I see that as a bit of a misconception, because again, building on everything that was just said earlier, it's you already have, compliance. You already have committees. You already have governance. It's an integration of that because otherwise, guess what's going to happen? We all know that this is the next thing around the corner that's going to pop up, whatever it's going to be called. Are you going to have to set up a whole new committee just because of that? And then the next thing, another one? I mean,
Wow.
it's just, we have to be pragmatic.
Mm. I just want to switch the conversations a bit. I think now I want to get into the AI within the, say, financial institutions or the corporate setting. I think given your corporate experience, what is currently the mental model on AI adoption within financial institutions, given the field is changing almost practically every week? I think just for kind of interesting sake, we sit in a couple, well, WhatsApp groups, with all the AI builders, and the amount of speed that's coming across
Yeah.
everybody is like, oh my gosh, what's gonna happen next week?
No, you're absolutely right. And I think this is where, if I may be, well, I think there, everyone's struggling.
Mm,
I mean, I'm happy to get pushed back and say, no, 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 David, we've cracked the code, and it's solved for us. But I think if you look at it from an enterprise point of view, and again across the industry, I think it's fair to say everyone is struggling. Exactly to your point, because it is just moving so damn fast, and there's still a mental mindset or a shift that needs to be taken from the SDLC, the software lifetime development cycle, to to okay, how do we now set up an environment and a platform that allow us for this kind of elasticity?
yeah.
And candidly, that's still, again, obviously not in the tech world,
Mm,
which had the luxury of kind of setting the foundations right, if I may again be fair. It's a bit tricky. It's a bit tricky when you already have a monolith, when you
mm,
already have a lot of legacy systems, when you have a lot of technical debt. But on that same vein, I think that is exactly where the shift has moved. It's not just about the use cases and applications, because let's just be transparent. I think there are many out there, but how you create this operationalization environment. And by environment, by the way, I'm kind of referring to the full stack of not just infrastructure, not just platform, not just embedded API gateway capabilities, and not just people, that then allows us to go, okay, we want to do this use case. We want to do this use case. We want to do this use case. Oh, hold on a second. There's been an advancement. Now it's, GPT 10.12. Okay, how do we plug? You see, so it gives you this modularity
mm,
within a governed and safe mechanism of review. I would say that's the mindset, that's the goal. But as with everything, the devil's in the detail, and it's not always that easy to do.
mm. But how about like I mean, for banking environments, because of
Yeah.
the way how financial institutions are regulated, one big trouble is actually in data leakage. I see it with companies that advise. I guess maybe I just want to hear a much more
Yeah, yeah.
practitioner point of view, right? How do you think about, say, you want to operationalize, say, an AI model within an environment that is so highly secure, robust, resilient? I think the requirements are extremely strict, and I really don't envy the person who, having the trouble to think through all that. What's the thinking from your perspective when you try to make that kind of engagement
So
with the bank itself?
so that's actually a very interesting point. And I'll be candid. I think
Mm,
it's kind of also an evolution in my thinking as well.
mm,
And I don't want to sound like a parrot, but actually going again back to first principles. Specifically a financial institution, obviously
mm,
regulated entity, risk is nothing new because that's finance. You
mm,
estimate risk, you price risk, and you engage. And if you think about, okay, let's focus on the top line. Let's not focus on the services side for a second, and I'll get back to the core of
mm,
your question. But I just want to set the premise right. We do very risky things. I mean,
true.
we're buying debts. We're buying potential futures. We're making bets. We're doing pretty damn risky stuff that can go wrong.
Mm,
But, and this is a very important but, is we know how to estimate it. We know how to review it. We know how to create frameworks within it. We know how to go, yes, I know what is the risk I'm exposed to, and I
yep,
know how to mitigate it, and I know what to do when it does happen, if it does happen.
yep,
And that's why regulators go, yeah, go ahead, please do your work. I don't think, and again, I don't want to be unkind, but this is, I said, this is an
yeah,
evolving
yeah,
thought processes. I don't think we apply that same type of discipline and maturity on the backside of the house. And I noticed exactly like you said, it's like, oh no, 100% security. I remember I was in a conference once and we were talking about data leakage in terms of de-anonymization of data. And I
Yeah.
said, if you legally require the inability to de-anonymize data, don't do it because 0.0000001 is still a risk. So we take this extreme view, which as a sign point is ironic because I actually think that increases the risk. But again, that's a different conversation.
Mm.
So my recent thinking is, no, we need to take the same mindset that we have on the front office to the back office and go, so it's not about zero risk.
Yeah.
Step one is understanding the risk. Do we understand it? And then you suddenly realize not all risks are the same.
Mm.
Number one. Number two is, well, what is it we're trying to really mitigate? Number two. Number three, what is our risk appetite? I'm sure you've heard the term, risk-based approach.
Yep.
But it's said risk-based approach, but then when you look at it, it's like, yeah, but you're trying to achieve zero risk. That's not risk-based. So you get my point.
I get a point.
So then it's ultimately, obviously, we want to eliminate, we want to mitigate leak, of course, but there needs to be a pragmatism-based approach towards it. And ironically, I actually think that will make it more resilient and safer. Doesn't mean that bad things don't happen because, again, we live in the real world, but it means it actually will be safer because we're cognizant about it. And when things go wrong, we know calmly. What do they always tell you when there's a fire happening, when there's an earthquake? What do they always tell you? Stay calm. It's when you overreact. And so same thing, we can calmly know how to deal with it and how to mitigate it. That's kind of the lens that I'm applying. And that's kind of, I'm trying. I'll tell you whether it's successful or not.
No. I'm quite curious, right? Like, for example, if you think about the large language models, even within the AI space today, a lot of the large language models, one of the question is the open source and closed source models, right?
Yeah.
And enterprises need certainty, right? So one of the things that if you look at like Anthropic does is that they provide it through, say, a cloud provider, whether it could be Azure, GCP, or AWS. And then there is a kind of a policy saying that whatever you do with this here, there's no data leakage into those environments, right? So there is that one question. So there's one layer of complexity that you need to deal with. Then there is a second layer where your CEO has gotten productivity gains through using ChatGPT and decided that, hey, you know what? Everybody should turn on their co-pilots, only didn't realize that they forgot to turn on the security switch. And everybody gets to read the calendar of the CEO and the emails of the CEO, right?
Yep.
Where is that? How would you do you apply a first principle approach into risk-based on each one of these situations, or is it something even much more tighter and say, okay, this is a specific enablement use case, this is a development environment use case, and this is something else, maybe a customer service use case at some point?
So I think the honest answer is, and look, I'm very happy to learn from others, but I think we're still in the evolving process. Because one thing I kind of forgot to mention earlier is, and people should not underestimate, is trust. Like an example, it's like when you go to a doctor, does doctors always get it right? No, sometimes they get it wrong, and sometimes pretty dramatically wrong. But we fundamentally have a mechanism of trust. The problem that we have, and I'm segueing this into your question here, that we lack with all the excitement of the world of AI is trust. We just simply did not have the time to build it. And that's the thing, is there's certain things that we can't skip in that process. I know this sounds very emotional, but we're human. And we have to remember that that's the core of it.
You're absolutely correct on that, because Ping, who came on the show in a previous episode, made exactly the same argument on that. It's about trust. Exactly. Whether AI application take off is not a question of, because the technology is so commoditized. The question is whether how much trust you can build with the user.
So in that vein, the approach that I still prefer to take is a use case based approach, because what it allows you is to start having that elasticity. So for example, you may say to me, hey, David, you know what, this productivity gain. Let's take the one you made Copilot. It's awesome. I want to activate it. It's like, okay, fantastic. How about we do it for your team.
Mhm.
See my point?
Yeah, yeah.
With him, let's literally, because then if something goes wrong, okay, at least it wasn't your team.
Yeah, that's right.
Let's
No, no,
contain.
no. You remind me when I was doing digital transformation, right? And I have an agreement with the CIO say, hey, you know what? We're going to start with Slack. And the CIO said, well, your team can try it first and then let me know when we can bring it over to everyone.
And going back to the point of the framework is when you have so I almost see the whole process of AI, and I try and look at things in a way which results ultimately in an assembly line. And the reason I do that is because it allows for some extent of consistency and replicability. So
Mm,
both in terms of development of AI, but then also more from a strategic point of view, basically the strategy of AI. And as part of that assembly, exactly, it's just because we're doing it for, let's say, your department, or we're doing it for your particular use case, let's say banking. So let's say treasury liquidity management, or
yes.
a particular bank assurance engage, whatever. It doesn't mean that I can't scale it up rapidly, but at least creates these deliberate, conscious checkpoints to kind of see, okay, are we going in the right track? And then to backcheck, because let's say, I'll give you a perfect example. As we're doing it, we may find that, just like with the case of HR on that particular institution, I'm sorry, Bernard, we're not going to switch on with Copilot. I'm sorry, MS. We're not going to switch on Copilot for you, or we're not going to do this use case for you. And the reason we're not doing it for you, but we're doing it for them, is because A, B, C, and D. Again, going about setting the boundaries. And I was having this wonderful conversation with someone, and full credit to them. And we were talking again about speed limits. And they said, like,
Mm,
oh, the speed limit is, let's say, 70 kilometers per hour, but we're only going at 40. I said, but hold on a second. Just because the national speed limit is 40 kilometers per hour, is 40 fast or slow? Maybe as an organization, not right or wrong, we're saying we don't want to go 70. We want to go 40. Or there's certain parts of the organization, because they're driving this massive semi-trailers, you know, it's like, no, even if you go at 70, it's really going to be start risky. Whereas a small little MG, you know what? Go for it. You can go at 70, even 71. You see my point. It's about contextualization. And this goes back to the premise and mindset from SDLC in how we used to do tech and it's we build and we roll out.
mm,
AI has fundamentally almost, I'm trying to think of the right anecdote, but just fundamentally changed the mindset that it's now contextual to the level of application. It is contextual. It depends. So going in by thinking, oh, we're just going to have this one ring to rule them all. I'm sorry, but my personal point of view, fail.
mm,
And that's going back to feet. It's it's one ring in terms of spirit, in
mm.
terms of Bernard, I want to make sure you do not cause harm.
Yep.
How you take the approach to not do harm, I'm sorry, but that's up to you, because it depends and it's contextual to you. And now you also see that internationally. And again, no right or wrong. What China is doing is not right or wrong. What US is doing, it's not right or wrong. What Europe is doing is not right or wrong. It's contextual to them, because they all want to achieve the same goal of do no harm.
Mm. So I think if you will think about practical examples of AI implementations, and
Mm,
I think let's not talk about just your organizations
sure, sure.
given that, but maybe why don't you talk about, say, very good, interesting examples you have seen
Ah.
outside, or implementation that even illustrate some form of value creation?
Oh,
Because
wow. Where to begin?
I always get this question from a lot of CEOs, and sometimes some of them they're already doing it, and then I'm also quite embarrassed to say, hey, actually your AI implementation is pretty interesting. I would like to learn more.
Yeah, this is what I meant, that to really be candid and fair. Some
Mm,
really exciting stuff that's been out there, and you know, and I've recently been learning a bit more in terms of the also on the operational side of the
mm,
house. For example, you have, and this is in production use case, where you have literally fully autonomous agents in terms of cash reconciliation.
yep.
Almost think of it as self-healing. So when errors occur, usually you would have a person who will come in to do some reconciliation or recorrection. It's now you literally have agents which have a bank ID, they have a bank email, that are able to do these micro tasks as part of a large console. So that is absolutely mind-blowing, seeing it in operation. All the way to your front end line. And again, this is, finance is a it's same. It's
Mm,
about
mm,
identifying products. It's about hyper personalization. it's just doing it. So the ones which actually got me excited, ironically, was bank assurance. Why did it get me excited? Is because no one likes to talk about their mortality. And it's a very heavy product. Yet they used AI to really be able to identify the cohorts of people who need it because you're planning a family, you're going to your next stage of journey. So just like, food apps and whatnot, I'm saying like, oh, you want to get from this and have a
Yeah.
discount, same thing, and bringing it to life and seeing the actual impact to the area which I do carry from, my ex life in the regulator of financial crime. I have seen some applications which candidly blow things off the water. Let me give you two concrete examples. Transaction monitoring.
Mm.
Today, our solutions, and I'm not throwing mud because it is what it is, 97% false positive. So for every transaction alert that is flagged, actually, it's okay. That's a lot of noise. Imagine you're dealing with a system that has 90% noise ratio to actually correctness. I've seen overlay of AI that has been able to drastically reduce that by up to 50%. Now, that don't just think of it from a banking operational efficiency point of view. Think of it from a customer service and enjoyment level. Where now, when you're overseas and you're trying to buy, a friend dinner or your wife and your card date's declined because it incorrectly got flagged, now suddenly it's a lot more fluid. All the way to preemptively mitigating the risk. Like, not to jump the world of cybersecurity, but as those who deal with the world of cybersecurity know, zero-day attack. So when they've already infiltrated the system, usually happens on average about 100 and what is it, 130 to 180 days before the actual attack. It just sits there. So again, using these agents to identifying these vulnerabilities before the incident occurs. So you see, it's shifting this mindset and the ability of operations from a kind of reactive mode to things are running,
Proactive. Yeah.
and effectively we're correcting, we're adjusting, we're seeing this level of satisfaction. And then finally, really going down to the level of providing the level of service at the level of service that is needed. And then a final point that I'll mention on this is we're currently in a very interesting situation whereby we have no choice because we as consumers,
Mm.
individuals to corporate, we are using these tools. I'm like, you just mentioned you got, GPT on your phone, you that. So you literally go to your bank and branch. It's like, hey, how can you not do that here? Let me help you. It's a level of expectation that has gone up. And I can tell you candidly, it's now a competitive advantage because the provider that can do it will just naturally get the audience because, like, yeah, that's the level of service, that's the level of engagement that I expect as I can do it at home.
Mm. I have a question. Like, if that's the case, right? Then what about like if you're definitely building a team to in order to help, say, other teams to be able to be
Yes.
AI enabled? What kind of skills or roles have actually become critical?
Oof.
I get a question all the time, even
Yeah,
from
yeah. Okay, so
somebody sent all their C-suite people come in and then talk, and then after being blown away by the AI, then the first question asked me, how do I get that downstream? And then I say, I think, there's some things that do not change.
uh,
Management, your company culture, how it gets people to adopt technology, that doesn't change. And that has to be adopted the same way as you have done it before.
uh, you see my nodding.
Yeah.
100%. Let me break my response into two parts. Let me talk about the people, and let me then talk about something you just said right now, which I again I want to really, really emphasize because I feel sometimes because this world is seen very technology, we actually forget about it. Again, I don't think deliberately, but just we forget about it. So the first one is back to my point that I try and see everything as a supply chain.
Mm.
Same thing. AI is not one thing. It's a supply chain. So you do have to have all the way from your infrastructure people. Again, whether or not you're a cloud advocate or you have your own, you do need to have the people that understand the underlying architecture of this stuff because at the end of the day, everything rides on top of it.
Mm.
Two, world of Gen AI, which in fact the word AI can be a bit misleading. It's a
Yep.
lot of full stack software development that is necessary because also from an integration point of view. Of course, as you kind of go up the supply chain, again, look, I've seen various ways of calling them from, AI translators to business thing. I mean, I've kind of recently defaulted back to the term just product owner.
Okay.
AI product owner, just to make it simple.
Mm.
But what it simply is a profile that, knows enough about the technology to be dangerous, but understands and can communicate with the business, and vice versa. Because also,
Mm.
you don't look, I used to joke and say that if you can find a data scientist, like I used to say this in the past, that can understand and do the world of data science, code, implement, and do that, and at the same time, and stand in front of the business and coherently explain that simply in their terms, that is a unicorn. Lock them up in the room and don't let them leave, because that is very rare. Usually, you'll find that the people are very good at different stage on that horizontal. So that's necessary. And then to your second kind of the
Mm.
part which you kind of were touching on, actually, I know that I come from this world, so it's kind of easy for you to say, as one would
Mm.
say, the tech is easy. It's the
Yeah.
people, it's the process. It's like, for example, remember we just spoke about, the agents
Mm.
and, or reconciliation, etc. and whatnot.
Yep.
How do you not just change the today's process? How do you fundamentally reimagine it? How do you reward new managers from the existing manager? What's their KPIs? If you go all the way to the extreme, let's say we have organizations whereby the way you get promoted, Bernard, is when you've gone from managing one person to managing 100 people. Okay, I get promoted but now suddenly I'm still managing one person, but I'm not, I'm also managing 90 bots. So there's this
90
massive
agents.
90 agents, exactly. When you have this massive, it's almost like an organizational talent necessity of how do I do that? And I'll give you one final example. I was in front of an audience not too long ago.
Mm.
I think maybe a month, 2 months ago. And we were talking about the culture of innovation.
Mm.
And I said, okay, let's talk about the culture of innovation. And I looked at them and I said, do you reward your staff today for failure? And they just stared at me and said, well, David, what do you mean? Do we reward them for failure? I said, no, dude, literally, I'm being as literal as possible. Do you reward them for failure? And
Mm.
obviously, I'm saying it slightly provocatively. I said, okay, let me double click. Now, when I say failure, I'm not obviously talking about that you're, maliciously or negligent in a
Yeah.
manner result in issues. Obviously not. I mean, that's a
Yeah.
fireable offense. But let's say I come to you and let's just say let's role play for a second. You report to me and say, Bernard, I'm going to give you a mandate. I want you to roll this use cases of AI across the business, blah, 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 blah. And you go ahead and do it. Well, guess what? Remember what I just said. It's contextual. Just because all the pieces of the puzzle doesn't mean it will work, right? Because
Yep.
maybe can't predict in a certain manner, maybe the level of gain is not as in we envisage. Life happens.
Mm.
Do I then still reward you? Do I give you a healthy bonus because you've done a damn good job in trying to do that, yet it did not succeed?
Mm.
I will err on the side of saying probably not.
I see.
Now, that's something that has to change if the intention is from an innovation. Again, this is a personal point of view.
Mm.
It's about the intent in which we're trying to move. We can never neglect or forget about the human element. The irony for me, and remember, what was my starting point? What drove me into the world of AI is understanding human. It's
Yeah.
understanding us. And if there's one thing I've discovered over the years of doing more and more about AI, it is about us. And yet we sometimes forget it.
Yeah, I once asked my class, because I teach generative AI in the university, I asked everyone, and because I did this study about hallucination, they know which part of the neural networks is actually turned on when the hallucination showed up. And then I asked everyone, should we turn it off if we know where it really is? And everybody is like 50-50 on it. And then I said, well, there is actually study in psychology and other disciplines, right, that shows that actually experts have the highest tendency to hallucinate. Because a medical, you can think of it very simple, right? A medical specialist specializing in cancer doesn't encounter something that is not in the textbook.
Well, Bernard, I'm
Yeah.
willing to go on a limb and bet a lunch, which I'm happy to have anyway,
Yeah.
that almost all, if not most, of leaders, innovators, at the point of inception, were challenged by people around them by saying you're hallucinating. And one that just pops into my mind by saying electric vehicles, that
Yeah.
would be a common commodity,
Mm.
going to outer space,
Mm.
etc., etc., etc.
Correct.
At the point of inception of the idea, people look and go like, "You're hallucinating." It's like that's not going to happen.
Yeah. That is the whole point, right? And then now you have to impose such a strong standards onto the AI that you're implementing. Don't you find it very ironic?
This is why hallucination for some is a feature, for
And
others
not
it may
a
about Therefore, it's really important to be self-aware
Okay.
as to what is it that you're trying to achieve. I know it sounds borderline. Okay, sorry, complete tangent, but talking
Mm,
about talent, I was in a
mm,
university roundtable, and we were
mm,
talking about the necessity to train more about AI governance
mm.
for students to help promote a culture of innovation and AI. And I kind of thought about it for a second. I said, actually, something. Well, obviously, conceptually, one cannot disagree.
Mm.
What we need to teach is philosophy. What I need to encourage you is to read more about Greek mythology,
Yeah.
because if anything, we need to have more thinkers. If anything, we need to ask more questions, because
Questions.
if
Yeah.
anything, AI now facilitates that. When my best friend, from literally pre-kindergarten called me up in a frenzy and said, you see, I told you you're going to be the reason for the end of the world. She's a teacher, and it's like, these Gen AI and these chatbots are going to basically get me fired. And I said, no, if anything, it's challenging you to teach more. Is to, when we keep on saying that, oh, it's critical thinking that is important for the future. Well, guess what? That's exactly what you have time to focus on, because the, model answers and the easy stuff,
Doesn't work
let,
anymore.
let the agent handle it.
Yeah. I have one more question that's quite important, and I think this is a business conversation that a lot of business owners like to ask me. How do you measure your ROI or value from AI initiatives beyond cost savings?
Oh, crikey. That's a fun chestnut, that one.
Mm,
Okay, let's start with, it's very important to kind of understand the team's raison d'etre, the reason for being.
yeah,
Why do I say that? Because if the team's purpose is innovation, there is no such measurement. In fact, anything, I would say you're kind of deluding yourself, because innovation, your revenue, your potential, quantifiable benefit it's a downstream impact. And look at the world of AI. I mean, this is stuff that's been happening since 1940s,
yeah,
1950s. Hello. So the way of KPI, the way of measurement needs to be a code. However, for the rest, which is really about adoption, which is about implementation, it's about operationalization, I do believe in, I know this might sound a bit unfriendly, but I do believe in enforcing a quantitative and, for simplicity, financial monitoring.
mm,
Now, even let's say, so I build a solution that helps a frontline line in terms of selling more to customers. Obviously, they're the P&L holders. I'm just in the background, but I will still spend time initially to compare, to look, okay, what was your baseline, let's say, for the last 3
yeah,
months, and now what is your baseline vis-a-vis using these capabilities, to basically be able to report that delta. But then, of course, it gets normalized. Similarly, on the cost saving side, I'll look. So I would look at it on both fronts, and I'll create a mixture bag of the revenue, the impact from cost savings, but as well as also the revenue impact from, so in other words, your top line. And then also risk, by the way. So we talked about, let's say, reducing the number of false positives. I would also measure that, or mules detection, in a financial gains, because in terms of how much money have I helped protect?
mm,
You see, so, and the reason is because it's easier to interpret it, and then, to be fair to the organization, it becomes easier to identify, like, actually, something, that area just doesn't make sense. Yes, we can do this, but candidly, just no. It helps prioritize.
I see.
Yeah.
Okay, please continue.
No, no, no. I just want to say, just a last point about cost saves. Yes, we do it. I do it. I've always done it. But AI, in the end of the day, is really about knowledge. It's about insight. I remember I had a,
Mm,
not debate, because it was more my boss at the time
mm,
giving me a scolding. So it was a one-sided debate
mm,
where he said, "Well, David, you've rolled out this initiative for operations, and we claim that." So in this particular case, it was, we were able to reduce the number of times you needed to call a customer in order to result in a collection. So let's say if I previously had to make 5 calls before to collect $1, now I only have to do 2 calls to collect that $1. So yeah,
mm.
cost saving. But it'd be like, but David, they still have the same number of people. And you see, this is where sometimes it gets hairy. We're saying, well, look, number one is, I can't control the usage of people because I'm ultimately a provider of a capability. And it cannot detract the outcome of the capability that it results in that less need. But number two is the reality of today is that this will probably result in more insight about how the consumers are behaving. And you find that you're assigning the people to do that, to work on that additional insight, whether it's in creating more processes, whether it's creating more services. My point is that we shouldn't undermine the value add created by knowledge. If you see where I'm going with this.
Yeah. No, I get that point. So yeah, I think the point of it is not in the cost savings, it's the way how you're going to use that knowledge to create the value.
Exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. It's not like a, you know, net zero kind of scenario. That you say you shave here, but you gain here. So
Mm.
it comes
So
together.
so this comes to the final question, right?
Hmm.
How do you see the role of AI now evolving for the next few years within financial services? Is it going to be a pretty gradual,
Oh,
or or it's going to be a very, very fast track, similar to a lot of other industries who is now trying to work out what they want to do with AI?
well, I can tell you what my hope is. My hope is I'll be fast tracked because I, look, everyone's investing. I think you need to be living underneath a rock that's underneath another rock to discredit the tangible value that has been provided. And this is actually this is a fun time to live because before it was more difficult to explain, to visualize, to demonstrate the value of using these knowledge-based systems. Now it's just so easy. It's like
Yeah.
the way we operate, the way we do things on a private basis. So I would love to see that accelerating. Now, realistically, of course, there'll be your your shakers and movers and your followers, and that's how it always will be. Because candidly, it goes back to the very earlier points that we discussed about your existing environments, your technical debt,
Mm.
legacy. I mean, it, it's some of them will be existential questions because you may look at your house and go like, wow, I can renovate it, but it's going to cost me 10 times more than just tearing it down and building a new one. But I can't really tear it down because I have people living inside. You see, so it's questions that go beyond, again, technology and AI and empowering skill sets.
Mm. So, David, many thanks for coming on the show. Before that, I have two closing questions. The first one, and I call it the Aisha's question. On a personal level, how do you use AI tools or platforms to enhance, say, your leadership, decision making, or productivity?
Okay, number one, I was it last year or something, I got a tick on X. So
Mm.
I got access to Grok. I use Grok extensively. My preferred approach of using it is I don't have Grok write for me, but I write, but I have Grok essentially help me in terms of grammar, in terms of recommendation. Because what's also nice is that he actually looks at my historical style. Again, I'm not just Grok, I'm saying
Yeah, yeah,
at
yeah,
least I pay. And
correct.
he goes like, well, David, this has been your style and some changes. So it's actually kind of helping me as part of, again, my evolution. Secondly, and again, I'm not ashamed to say it, is I like to test ideas. So one prompt, which by the way, I recommend to everyone is
Uh,
literally end with ask me questions as part of this conversation. So it's
yeah,
not just, no, seriously, because
yeah,
a lot of
yeah,
times
I
people are
know,
like,
I know the hack. It's
eh,
ask before answering, because you
correct,
want it to ask you clarifying questions to push
correct,
you towards what
correct.
you want.
Because a
Yes.
lot of people understandably like, oh, what's this? Or how's about that? I literally said, so I remember I had conversation about, foreign currency exchange,
Yeah,
geopolitical,
yeah, yeah.
Taiwan. And it's fascinating because again, it goes back to my underlying premise, my first principle. It's about knowledge. It's about how do I use it to improve me? And back to your point about teams, also how to engage, how to provide an
I'm really surprised you are not using cloud Anthropic's cloud, because they is a default for them.
like I said, it goes back to ease of
I
access.
see.
It goes back
Okay.
to ease of access. It's like, when I mean, let's one of the
Okay.
reasons the reason there was antitrust lawsuits and all that, but not going down the path
Yeah,
of like
yeah.
when you get an Android phone, it already comes with a Google browser. It's just there. It's not that I wouldn't use Cloud if I had it. If it's not, I would. It just happens to be that I'm using it.
Decided to be a professional user because enterprise-wise, I'm using it to
Yeah.
help companies to do their financial automation. But of all the three, is my most preferred. when it comes to deep thinking. I agree with you, Grok is really good. You could
Yeah.
solve theoretical physics problems.
No, but there's some stuff it's not really
Yeah,
great
yeah,
at.
yeah. But the math part for some reason is better. Between Sonnet 3.7. Yep. Okay.
So maybe kind of as we're tailing off, just to add, which is actually going to be quite interesting. I mean it from a behavioral perspective, how it evolves is we're now faced with, so once upon a time is like, now you have what, Disney Plus, Hulu, Netflix, and it's just different content, and you basically have, let's say, multiple subscription, or say like, no, I'm just going to stick with Netflix. But now it's not just you just have different, let's just simplify it and call it agents. Their capacity is different. Their knowledge is sometimes even a bit different. The way they interact with you is slightly different. So I'm kind of wondering whether you will find that you will get this, whether, if people kind of subscribe to one rather the other, whether they kind of almost, again, I'm stretching here, the
Yeah,
reality that,
yeah.
evolve slightly differently in the way they're thinking, the way they're doing things. Or on the contrary, you'll find aggregators by saying, you know what, I am now giving you the ability to pose your question or have your dialogue or search for information as a super node that basically gets it from
Okay,
an array
okay.
of
Yeah,
experts.
yeah, yeah. There is an app for that.
There you go. There you go. Because think about this. Like, why do companies, why do people arrange panel discussions? Why do you have a survey? Why do you speak to multiple experts? It's because you're like, okay, let's get a few views and let's challenge one another. Let's do that. So that's going to be really interesting. I think that's going to be a very interesting development moving
My
forward.
final short question. What's the
Sure.
one question that you wish more people would ask you about AI?
Why?
Why?
Why? Literally, just why? Like in everything, to go again to the why. Why are we doing it? Why, in terms of, it's like literally why. That to me
Okay.
is the biggest one.
Do you have an answer to that?
I do. It depends.
Okay, David, many thanks for coming on the show.
Pleasure.
And how do my audience find you? LinkedIn?
Oh, LinkedIn. I got a website. Was it davidhardoon.com? But please, I've succumbed to the visibility of the World Wide Web. So
Okay, so you can definitely find this podcast on YouTube, Spotify, and
uh,
LinkedIn. And of course, we're gonna continue talking. So, David, many thanks for coming on the show. And I shall also say thank you, and
thanks so
we'll
very
speak
much.
soon.
Which has
Okay,
been missed. Cheers. Bye bye.
bye.